Let's look at a couple of other issues here as we wind up this chapter. Let's look at the sort of variable growth model where there's a supernormal growth period. And we're still going to value this using the present value of dividends, but what we'll do is we'll typically use just read this. The present value of dividends during the exceptional growth period is observed. So in the early period, there's a very high level of growth. And then the present value of the normal constant dividend period, where it's going to grow at a normal rate in perpetuity, follows that period of supernatural growth. And this variable growth model is used to determine the price of the stock at the end of the supernatural growth period. So first of all, we'll value the sort of normal dividends that occur out in perpetuity, but that normal period won't start until some date in the future, but we'll value those, and then we'll find the present value of that, and we'll add that to the present value of the supernatural period. Sometimes this is referred to as a two-stage growth model, where we have two stages, one stage of supernatural, one stage of natural growth. And we just value the two pieces sort of independently and add those together. We'll talk more about this a little bit later. We'll see some examples of this. The other topic that we want to touch on briefly is the idea of price-earnings ratios. What we've shown so far are dividend discount models for valuing stocks. Now, the difficulty of using a dividend discount model, as we've seen, is you have to estimate future dividends. And while this is theoretically the best way to do it, we had to resort to some shortcuts, such as the constant growth model or the zero growth model, or maybe we got fancy and used a two-stage model. But in reality, for many firms, the dividends grow in a way that none of those models can capture very accurately. And so the pure difficulty of applying good theory will sometimes cause us to resort to some other shortcut. And one of these shortcuts that's used, which isn't necessarily theoretically based, but does get used in practice, is the price-earnings ratio. And the idea is, rather than using dividends to value the firm, we'll use earnings to value the firm. The price-earnings ratio is a multiplier that we apply to the current earnings to determine the share price. So if you know the share price, the price earnings is just the price divided by the earnings. But if you are trying to estimate what a share price ought to be for a stock, you might look at other firms in the same industry, look at their price to earnings ratio, and apply that ratio to the earnings of the company you have an interest in, and see, well, does this stock seem to be reasonably priced based upon its earnings and a industry-wide price-earnings ratio. Price-earnings ratios are influenced by a number of things. This is a short list of them. The growth in earnings that we expect, the risk level of earnings. If earnings are relatively risky, the price-earnings ratio is going to be smaller. Debt equity structure, dividend policy, quality of management, all these things are going to affect the price of the stock, and therefore, given that we're starting with an earnings number, they must be affecting the price-earnings ratio. So I want to emphasize that price-earnings ratios get used, they're frequently reported, they're not theoretically based, but as a practical matter, people do use them for stock valuation, so we wanted to introduce price-earnings ratios.